Hello, kids. Are you ready for another story? Good. Okay. I want you to lay back and relax. The name of this story is The Honest Woodcutter. Once upon a time, there was this woodcutter. He would go to the forest, cut down trees, and he would use the trees to sell as wood, and he would get money for this. And he used the money to buy food and clothes for his family. Now, the woodcutter was an honest man. The woodcutter, one night, was talking with his family. They were having dinner. And he was talking and he said, if you could have anything you wanted in the whole world, what would you want? And his wife said, the mother, she said, I would love to have some nice, beautiful dishes to serve food on and to eat on. And then the woodcutter himself said he'd love to get a big new house. And his son and daughter, they said they would like a lot of new toys to play with. Well, that night, the woodcutter thought about what was said, and he decided to work extra hard cutting trees so he can make enough money to give his family what they wanted. So the next day, the woodcutter went deep into the forest and was cutting wood with his axe. He swung his axe into the trees, and he was able to cut down trees, and he did this daily. This axe he had, it was old, but it could still cut trees. The woodcutter worked every day. He took without any food or water. He took only one break at noon when he walked to the river. He ate his lunch and had a drink of the water. One day, he was cutting, still cutting, and he stopped and he went for his lunch break, and he went down to the river and he ate his lunch, and then after that he went towards the water to get a drink. But he didn't notice this rock that was in his way, and the woodcutter tripped over the rock, and while doing that, his axe went into the water. The water was moving very fast, and the axe went down into the river very quickly, and the woodcutter became sad, and he said, what am I going to do? I don't have my axe. I can't cut trees so I can make money to buy my family what they dreamed of. Well, he looked at the water, and then the water started to move around in circles, and it started making bubbles, and the woodcutter didn't know what was happening. But all of a sudden, this person sort of came out of the water. And it wasn't a person at all. It was a special water fairy. The water fairy looked at the woodcutter and said, wow, you look sad. I'm sorry. How can I help you? The woodcutter looked at the fairy and said, I dropped my axe into the river, and now I don't know how to get it. And I needed to cut more trees. The fairy looked and said, I think I can help you. I will go down into the water and I will look for your axe. So, the water fairy went down into the river and looked for the axe. And after some time, he came up with an axe. But this axe was not like the one the woodcutter had. This axe was beautiful. It was made of silver and had crystals in it. He said, "Here you go." The woodcutter looked at this axe and he thought, wow, a rich person must have this axe. Look at it. If I could sell this axe, I could get enough money to give my family what they want. And the woodcutter said, "This axe is beautiful, but I cannot take it because it's not mine." The water fairy looked at him and said, "Are you sure it's not yours?" And the woodcutter shook his head. The water fairy looked for a moment. He took the axe and he said, "Okay, I'll look for another one." So, the water fairy drops the axe on the ground, goes back in the water, and starts looking again. And after some time, up again comes the water fairy with another axe. This axe was even more beautiful than the other one. This axe was made of gold, and it sparkled. And the water fairy said, "Ah, here we go. Now I found your axe. Please take it." The woodcutter looked at this axe, and he thought again to himself, a golden axe. I could sell this one and make even more money so I can get my family what they want. But the woodcutter looked at the water fairy and said, "I'm sorry, I cannot take this axe because it's not mine." The fairy now looked a little bit puzzled. The fairy didn't understand. He said, "Really? This axe is not yours? These two axes are not yours?" And the woodcutter said, Sorry, they're not mine." And the fairy looked, and the fairy said, "Okay, very well. I will look one more time for this axe." So the water fairy goes back into the water. And after some time, the fairy comes out of the water with this old axe. The woodcutter smiled and said, "Yes, this is my axe. It's a little bit old, but it's cut down many trees." The water fairy looked again and said, "Surely these other axes are much nicer than yours. Why didn't you take them?" he said. And the woodcutter said, "I could not take them because they weren't mine." The water fairy looked and smiled and said, "I understand. I will tell you a secret, woodcutter. These axes are mine, and now I'm giving them to you. Farewell, woodcutter." And the water fairy jumps back into the water, and the water bubbles and makes sounds, and then the river moves like it did before. There wasn't any fairy. The woodcutter was happy. He took the 2 other axes and his own and left the forest. The woodcutter went into town and found a man who would buy the axes from him. The man gave him a big bag of gold coins for the 2 axes. And the woodcutter used the coins to buy the dishes that his wife wanted and all the toys that his children wanted. He went back home that evening and brought them these things, and everybody was so happy. That night at dinner, the woodcutter told his story about the water fairy and the 2 axes and what happened. At bedtime, the woodcutter's son said to him, "Father, tell me something. Why did that water fairy give you the axes?" And then his daughter said, "I know why, Daddy. Because you told the truth, right?" And the woodcutter looked at his children and said, "Yes, that's right, because I told the truth." That's the end. I really hope you enjoyed that one. Okay. It's time to sleep. Good night. Daddy loves you both. Daddy loves you all.